I've had more requests for a React and TypeScript tutorial than I've ever had for any other topic, so let's get started. Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today we'll be looking at React with TypeScript, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. I've got Visual Studio Code open, and you can see I'm in my TypeScript series folder with all of the lessons over here to the left. I'm going to open up a terminal with Control and the backtick. Then I'm going to type npm create vite at latest. And we're going to create a React and TypeScript project. I'm going to go ahead and extend the terminal window up to the full size. I'm going to call this lesson 11 just to fit in with my other lessons. You can call it whatever you want. I mean lesson 12. I already had lesson 11. There we go. Lesson 12. Going to arrow down and choose React and then choose TypeScript, and Vite quickly creates this project. Now we need to go ahead and get into the lesson 12 directory. So I'm going to cd lesson 12, then I'm going to type npm I just to install everything. And we can type npm run dev if we want to as soon as this installs. However, I'm going to change folders first. So I'll get out of this TypeScript series folder and directly into the folder for lesson 12. So now I'm just going to open this back up, go into my TypeScript series, choose the lesson 12 folder and open that up so there's no confusion and we only see what this project has over here to the left. So now let's go ahead and Control backtick once again, and we can type npm run dev and go ahead and launch that project. It will give us our local host at port 5173. Control click should open that up, and here it is. It's running over here in Chrome to the right. And now we can just change that code as we want to. So I'll come back to Visual Studio Code for now, close the terminal, it will keep running, and we can start in on our project. So let's look at the source directory, and we can see a few things here and probably some things we won't need. So let's go ahead and open up the app TSX. Notice all of the files that we'll be using have this TSX extension instead of a JS or JSX extension. So we can just remove everything that we're essentially seeing here. So we'll remove the imports in the app. Let's remove this useState, and I'm going to remove everything it returns essentially here as well. And instead, we could just return anything we want to, say an H1, say hello for now, just so it has something there. Besides that, we don't need the rest. We can delete the app.css file, but there's not as much cleanup here with Vite as there would be with Create React App, so it's not too bad. We've got the main TSX, and we can just leave this the way it is. The index.css is something I'm just going to select all and paste in some very basic CSS. You can pretty much see it all here. We've got the reset at the top. I added just a little padding to all elements, and then just a few things here. You can get this from all of the source code that is linked to in the description for the course resources. I'll just save this, and of course this isn't necessary to apply what we're going to today. And so React is all about components. So let's just look at the easiest way to define a function component. And I'm going to create a new directory over here called components, so we can put all of the components that we create inside of this directory today. And with the new file, I'm just going to create heading.tsx. Now inside of this file, I'm using React ES7 snippets as an extension, so I can type RAFCE, press tab, and quickly get a functional component definition. But we're going to make some changes here. So first of all, let's talk about the types of props that we would pass in. And for a cleaner look, although you can inline everything, and we'll look at that too, it might be easier to just define a type above, and we'll call this heading props. Now I'll set this equal to a title that we would pass in, and this would be a string. So now we've defined our heading props. So as you might guess, our heading will receive a title, and as normal, we would destructure that from the props. After that, we could just put the heading props right here. Now, as we look at this, this is fairly clean. If you didn't do that, you would take this and you would just inline it. So if we put it here, This looks a little repetitive, doesn't it? At the same time, this is what you're doing with heading props. So I'm going to undo that because I like the look of defining a type first and then bringing it down here. And then let's just change the return here instead of this div with a heading, and we're just going to return an element, an H1, and it's going to have the title inside. Now this is a good time to bring up the return of a functional component. Usually it's a JSX element, and that's what we would expect. As I mouse over heading right now, you can see IntelliSense tells us it is a JSX dot element, has the JSX namespace, and that is typical. However, if you're just returning an element like this, you can be a little more specific. So here we could say this is a React element, and let's see if I can just pick that out of the menu, and it automatically imports at the top of the file. So I'm being a little more specific because I'm only returning an element right here. But it is normal to just let React infer, or let TypeScript infer, that it is a JSX element from React. And we can see this back in the app.tsx. As I mouse over app, you can see it infers that it is a JSX.element. You don't have to put that here explicitly. That is typical. That's what everybody expects. So only if you're changing something like I did to a React element would you switch that. So let's go to our app.tsx file and let's import our heading now. So we'll import heading, and that comes from components heading. And then let's use it here in our return instead of the hello. So just beneath this, I'll go ahead and put parentheses, as we'll put some more components in later. But we'll put in the heading that we just imported. And see, TypeScript doesn't like that because it knows that a title is required. So we need to pass in some type of title that should be a string. So we'll say title, and now inside of title, we can just say hello. Oops, I need a curly brace. There we go. And when we save, now TypeScript's okay with that. So let's go ahead and take a look at our page and see if Vite has updated it. And yes, we've got a big hello on our page now from our heading that we created here. I'll hide the file tree so we can see more of that. Also Alt-Z to wrap the code. Now we can see everything. And we've got our basic component. It is imported into the app.tsx, and we've got hello showing on the page, or whatever we would pass in as a string to the title prop. I'm going to drag this back to full screen for now, and I'll show the file tree again with Control B, but I'm going to create another component, and I'm going to name this section.tsx. Now there have been a lot of changes as we move to React 18, and some things that were previously done with TypeScript are no longer the case or not advised at this point. And I want to show some of that just because you'll see some other older tutorials or older legacy code, and maybe even inherit a legacy code base somewhere at work or wherever that uses some of these older things. And you need to know, of course, that you can move them to the newer way of doing things. So first, let's define this section the old way. So I'll have import React from React. And after that import, I'm going to say const section. And then this is something you would see in the past, React-functional component, or the alias, which is more likely because it's shorter, just FC here. So React, let me see, .fc, there it is. And then we would have our arrow, and then inside of this, we'd have our type, like title string, just like that. And of course, the closing arrow after the curly brace. And then we'd say that equals, and here, we could provide inside of curly braces again, because we're destructuring, we could provide children and the title. Now that's something else to note that we'll get to in a second. But then inside the function itself, let's say we'll return, we'll have a parentheses, we'll have our section element. Inside the section element, let me give an H2, put the title inside of that. And then underneath that, let's use the children as well. Now we'll talk more about children here in a second, but we'll put children in here. This is something you would see kind of the old way of doing things. Now I don't have an export here either, so I could either say export right here, or I could have my export default at the bottom. Either way, but I'll save that for now. And this is what we would see, Alt-Z again to wrap that down. And notice TypeScript has a problem with some of this already, but we wouldn't be using this react.fc or React function component here the way things are recommended to be now. So I will change this and show you the way things should be now. And likewise, the children issue here is something else that I want to cover just after that. So like we previously did with the heading where we defined a type here at the top, let's do that with our section to clean things up just a little bit. So I'm going to have type and I'll say section props. I'll set this equal to an object and I'll have a title here, and I'm going to make this optional with the question mark as well. And we'll come back to that. And then we also have the children, and notice how I'm defining what type the children should be right now. And I'm going to say React node, and that comes from React. So it imports at the top as well. Now in the past, you could do what we saw below without this explicit definition of the type. And that was an implicit definition of children. You could do that before React 18. You can't do that now. So you need to switch that. And children is different than props. If you're not familiar with the exact difference, children would be something we would put in between, like we would type in between the H2 or the paragraph. And I'll show you how that works as we pass it down. Okay, I'm just going to delete the react.fc and the type there. That's not the way to do things anymore. So we'll remove that. Now we'll have section equals, and we've got children and title being destructured here, and that's fine. Now we need to use our section props type right here. So section props. And now that we've provided that, we're pretty much good to go. Now we did make this optional, so we can provide a default value for the title, and I'll just say my subheading here. Now that is different than default props. So in the past, if you've worked with React and say you've had this section component, and then you would say section.default props and set that equal to something, you could do that, but that is being deprecated as we speak. We're on React 18.2 right now, if I believe. Let me look at the package JSON. Yes, React 18.2. I believe in 18.3 it is deprecated, the one that's coming right up. So we don't want to do the default props anymore. You just want to provide any default value right here, just like you would be passing it in after you destructure. So that's my default value for title if title is not provided. And we need to do that because I made title optional up above. So now we've changed everything to the current modern way of doing things. I can just remove the React from the import at the top. We just need the React node for the children, which that's what the children should be, is React node. And if I mouse over that and we look at the type, that's pretty wide open. The children can be lots of things: string, number, Boolean, a React element, a React fragment, React portal, null, define, undefined, I'm sorry. So lots of options there for React node. And that's good for the React children because you're not sure exactly what would be put in there. So let's save this and let's go back to our app TSX and let's import this. So we'll say import section, and that comes from our component section. After that, we can use it in the body. So I'll put it underneath the heading. I'm going to have a section here. And now let's put something in for the children. Right now, you can see TypeScript still doesn't like this. And if I mouse over, it's expecting some things that we do not currently have. So, oh, and it says we need a parent element as well. So I should put in at least a React fragment here. So I'll wrap that. And I'll save, and now we get the error just for the section. Let's see what it says. Property children is missing. The title was optional, so we didn't have to have that, but we do have to have children. Children are something we don't pass as a prop, like we'll have title equals something inside of this section, but the children go between the opening and closing tags. So here we could just put in a string or something else like that. So we can just put, this is my section. Fair enough. I don't know what else to put. And now this should work. Let's drag this over. And we've got my subheading, and this is my section. Now, where does my subheading come from? That comes from the default value we have for title, since we didn't pass a prop down. But we can pass a prop. So if we come back and we give a title here for the section, and here I'll just say different title, save. Here you can see we now have a different title because we're passing it in and it uses that instead of the default that we provided here in the section. I'm going to drag VS Code back to the full screen, and now let's look at the file tree one more time and make another component. I'll just call this one counter, as we'll make a simple counter to start out, and then we'll make some changes. So this will just import, and then we'll use state. So we'll look at how the use state hook works. And then inside of the component, here I can just do an RAFCE once again for counter. And then we'll use the state here at the very top. So we'll say const, and we'll have a count and a set count. And now let's look at how we can use this with TypeScript. So we'll say use state, and then I'm going to use a number. So I'll provide the number here inside of the arrows, and then I'll just provide a 1. Now this can vary. So say you're using some state that doesn't have a value at first. You have a null value. Then you would need a union here. So you could put this or null, or if you needed undefined or whatever else you might put. So say you were starting with null here, for example. But normally, if we just put the 1 here, we wouldn't even really need to put the number if we didn't want to, because this could be inferred as well. So you could easily see it without. If I mouse over count now, you'll see count is a number up here. It's already inferred by TypeScript. But if we want to be explicit, we can put the number in here. Now I'll quickly create the rest of this counter component, as it's a basic component, and then we'll modify it. So first we'll start out with an H1, and inside of this I'm just going to put count is, and we'll put the count. After that, we need a couple of buttons just to increment and decrement the count. So I'll say button, and now we'll have a button with an onClick. And this onClick is going to have an anonymous function. Then it is going to set the count, and we'll use the previous. We'll say previous plus 1, and so this is the increment function. Let's put a plus right there. And I'm just going to Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy this down, and I'll put a negative sign here, a minus sign, and do the same inside of our set count. So that is our decrement. So we can increase the count or decrease it. And this is our basic component right here. Yeah, nothing new really. We just learned about use state, but we will make some changes just as an example so you can see how it would work with some changes. But first, let's just import this now and make sure it's working as expected here. So we'll say import, and then we'll have counter, and it comes from components counter. And now let's put the counter below. So we'll just say counter, and there were no props. So let's save, and it should work as we expect it to. I'll drag this over. We have our count. The increment button works. The decrement button works. So not a lot new there, just the use state hook. However, let's go back and make some changes. First, let's pull this state into the parent, into our app TSX. And this is just an example, so it's nothing I would probably really do. I'm just looking for a simple example to show passing down some of the state that we would use, including the set count function. So I want to go back here into the app TSX, and I'm going to import useState. That comes from React. After that, I'm going to use the state here inside of the app TSX. And now our counter is going to be different. So instead of just having the counter here with no props, we're going to pass down the set count function. So set count will equal set count. And after that, we can say count is, and provide the count right here. Now, since this is between the opening and closing, this is the children area right here. That's how that will be defined. And you can see right now, TypeScript doesn't like what we have because we haven't modified all of our counter component yet. So let's go ahead and save this and go back to the counter component. Inside the counter component, I'm going to define a type first. So I'll say type, and I'll say simple. Let me just say counter instead of simple counter. I'll say simple counter props. And I'll set this equal to an object, and it will have set count, and we don't know what type that is yet, do we? So let's go back to the app TSX, and if we mouse over, we can see some IntelliSense here. It gives us a really long type, but this is the React type that we need, so we can just highlight and copy that, go back into our counter. That is the set count function type. After that, we'll say children, and then we'll say that is a React node. Then we need to import the React node if it didn't automatically happen for me at least. So I'll say import React node. That will come from React. So now we can use that. Now we need to receive those props here inside of the component. So we'll have set count, and we'll also have the children that we need to explicitly define now. Remember, we can no longer have implicitly defined children after React 18. So here we'll provide the type, and we've already created it above, so it is counter props. But we still need to change something in our component. Notice we have a line here. We're not passing down the count, we're passing down the children. And so we already provided that statement above or in the parent component. So now we'll just say children right here, and I'll save that. And so if we refresh our memory here, we go back and we look at our counter, and the children were right here. Count is, and it provides the count, and we're passing down set count. So when we look at this, we've got set count and the children as props. Here's their type that we defined above, and all should still be working. So let's drag this over to the left and let's take a look. Our counter is still working. So I just wanted to give this example, although I wouldn't do this with a counter. This is something that shows you how setState, any type of setState function that you would use with useState, could be passed down, and how you can use the children as well instead of possibly passing down the actual state. Okay, one more example today, and let's look at generics. And something we often do in React is render a list of items. So let's create a component that is very generic that we can pass in any items to, and it will render that list of items. So let's start out by saying import, and we'll be using React node once again. So this will come from React. And then once we've done that, let's create an interface. And we can use generics with an interface. So let's call this list props. And now I'll have my placeholder here, my generic, and I'll just indicate that with a T. You could create whatever you wanted, or use list item, or you could say item, or whatever you wanted as that placeholder, but T is kind of the standard. Then I'm just going to have items, and this will be an array of items. So I'll have my T there, and then the array to indicate that. And then we're going to have a render function. This will render that list of items. So this anonymous function will receive an item, and of course that's going to be type T. And then inside of here, we'll just have that React node that I imported. And so we don't know exactly what that is, but remember, as I mouse over, React node has a lot of possibilities. So that's a good one to choose there. String number Boolean, React element, and so on. And now I'll just come below this, and I'm going to use that RAFCE shortcut once again and quickly create that list component. But we need to make some changes here, of course. One thing is it's going to have that generic. So I'll put a T here, and it put a closing T right away because it's not sure what we're trying to do. And this is something that's a little strange, and I'll come back to fix that here in just a moment. I want to put the rest in first. So we're going to have the list items, and we'll have the render method as well. And that switched to something I didn't want. I want items. So we've got items and the render method being passed in, and we're going to have that list props here that we created above. And then it is going to receive that generic as well, which once again it didn't recognize, and I'll explain why here in just a moment. Get that back in there, and put that back to delete it one more time. There we go. So now we've got that, and we've got our function here. Let's go ahead and create the body of the function, and I'll come back to why that generic is not being recognized. So inside this body of the function, we're going to have an unordered list. In the unordered list, we're going to map over the items that we receive. Why it keeps changing that as well, I don't know. So items, please, and then map. And then inside of this, we'll have an item and an index. I'll just indicate that with the I. Put a parentheses, and now we're ready for our list item, and it's going to have a key, so I will need to add that, and that will be the index. So now we're mapping over each one, and we use that index as the key that React needs. And then here inside of the list item, we can just call our render function and render each item. Okay, so right now we do have some issues with TypeScript. It doesn't like anything we're doing. So when we provide a generic here and we're using a const like this and then an anonymous function, it has a hard time recognizing this generic. And there's a couple of solutions. One, you can put extends and put an empty object here. Notice all the problems went away. This just helps TypeScript recognize that this is a generic. But an easier way to do this is to just put a comma after that. And then, once again, all the problems went away. Everything looks just fine. And I just noticed that we imported render up here, which was not intentional. That happened automatically, and we don't need that. So now with our generic component in place, let's go ahead and use it inside of the app TSX. So we'll start out by importing it here. Import list from our components directory. And after we have that underneath our counter, we'll just start out with list. I need a capital L there. And then we need to set the items. So the items are going to equal, and I'm going to paste in an array here, and we can just look. It's very simple. I just have an item there. I need items. There we go. And it has coffee, tacos, and code, some of my favorite things. After that, let's go ahead and create that render function that we're passing down. So render, and this will equal, once again, with our curly braces. Then we can have our anonymous function. And it will receive an item, which is going to be of type string. And then from there, we'll put our arrow. And here we can render whatever we want to. If we wanted a paragraph, if we wanted a div, if we wanted a heading, whatever we want to display these list items. So I'm going to use something very generic along with our generic component, and that is a span element. Well, I guess I need to go ahead and type it all out. And then I'll put a class name, and we can change the appearance, of course, if we change classes. And I'll set this class name equal to gold to start off with. And then we'll just put the item inside of that. And so now we can save this, and we'll see how everything renders. Oh, and I'm missing the closing part of our list. And now everything should be good. And let's take a look at how it renders on the page. We have gold words here, coffee, tacos, and code. And we have rendered our list. Now, if I just come back and let me go into the CSS, we can see I have a bold class and a gold class. So let's switch that in our app TSX, and I'll bring this back over so we can see it better. Let's switch gold to bold and see if that appearance changes. Yes, now we have bold words instead of gold words. So that's a great way to create a generic component. And of course, you might see that accomplished with the function word as well. I'll come back here to the list. So you might see function list, and you might see this accomplished differently. This is how I typically write out my functional components, though, is with this anonymous function. And I thought it was important to show you how to get around that problem that seems to come up when TypeScript doesn't recognize the generic there as well. So for the next tutorial, I'd really like to go over more of the React hooks as well as you continue diving into React and TypeScript. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.